the American Civil Liberties Union, because freedom can't defend itself.
Hello, this is Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and I want to tell you about my new favorite discovery, Yosemite National Park. I recently went there with my husband and children, and we walked the trails to see the breathtaking waterfalls, admired the grand meadows, and giant sequoias. But the future of our national parks is uncertain. Many challenges face our parks today, from polluted air and water to development threats outside their borders and inadequate funding to protect our national heritage. That's why the National Parks Conservation Association recently completed a decade-long assessment of the challenges facing our national parks, along with proposed actions that will ensure our children and grandchildren will be able to enjoy the parks as we have. Our national parks have inspired Americans for nearly 100 years. As we approach the centennial of the National Park Service in 2016, please join us in helping to protect our national park legacy. Find out how at www.mpca.org.
You're listening to WEAT Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
It is it is Sunday, May 12th. Fantastic day out today, nice and sunny in the nation's capital. You're joining us on Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Maya is out, and I'm Alex Lawson. I'm going to be sitting in for her. I am the co-owner of WEACT Radio. And I'm joined today, it's going to be a great show. I'm joined in studio right now by Stacey Sanders. She is the Federal Policy Director of the Medicare Rights Center. And we're going to go in depth on what is happening with Medicare, what are the issues that are being talked about surrounding Medicare and Social Security. We're also joined, as always, by Pete Johnny Depp Callahan.
Good afternoon, Alex.
Who produces Pivot Point every week. And we're going to have a great show. Coming up, who's coming up in the show, Pete?
So we have Stacey's here in the first half hour, and in the second half hour we have Dean Baker on all things economics, and proving that Rogaine Rogoff should not be the mainstream authority in the economics world.
The discredited Harvard paper, I think, should be the final nail in the coffin of austerity. I think it's being. I try not to have rose-colored glasses about this, but it does seem to me that people are picking up to the idea that austerity is not a path for this nation. You can't get to prosperity through austerity, and I think this is going to be a great show. Let's kick it off talking about Medicare. So, Stacey, just set us the scene. What's going on around Medicare right now?
Sure, and thanks so much for having me today. Very excited to be here. So what's going on in Medicare? I think, Medicare really has been front and center in a number of the deficit reduction conversations that have been happening on Capitol Hill. We find that many policymakers, both Democrats and Republicans, are looking for ways to save in Medicare. And the unfortunate reality is that they are looking for savings by looking at benefits and scaling back benefits or shifting costs to people with Medicare. One of the things that doesn't really rise to the top is the reality that most people with Medicare have very limited incomes. In fact, half of all people with Medicare live on $22,500 or less, and that people with Medicare already spend a significant amount of their income on health care. People with Medicare, older adults, and people with disabilities spend 3 times as much on health care as compared to working and younger Americans. So the idea that we would shift additional healthcare costs onto people with Medicare is very troubling. And they've been looking to do that in a number of different ways. One thing that came up last year quite a bit was the idea of raising the eligibility age in Medicare.
What's the eligibility? I know our listeners, Maya's audience, is really well versed in this, but what is the eligibility age for Medicare right now?
Right now it's 65.
And Medicare is just tell us a little bit about the fact that we pay for our Medicare throughout our working life, right?
We do.
It's an earned benefit.
Yes, we pay in payroll taxes to the Medicare program. It's funded in part through those payroll taxes. It's also funded in part through general revenue, so through the tax base itself. And also revenue comes from the trust fund in Medicare. So it's funded in a variety of different ways, but largely through taxpayer dollars.
Mm-hmm. And what is being discussed, not just the wrong focus on austerity, we're going to talk about how that is just a misfocus overarchingly. But right now, there are plans on the table that have some specifics. And all of these specifics are to cut benefits, right? So these are benefits that people have earned. And what's being talked about right now in D.C. is cutting those so that people would get less benefits. Is that, basically, what are the different ways that because in Social Security and in Medicare, they hate actually just saying, we're going to cut your benefits, because that's deeply unpopular.
Right.
So they usually make it quite complicated. They never use those words. Tell our listeners, what are some of you talked about raising the retirement age, or the eligibility age. What are the specifics on that? What are they talking about raising it to?
We're talking about raising the age from age 65 to age 67. So you would not be eligible for Medicare benefits until you turn 67. And they talk about phasing that in gradually for future beneficiaries. But the reality is it's an across-the-board benefit cut. People who are expecting to receive Medicare at the age 65 would now not be eligible for the program until 67.
And I know you have had experience, you must have had same experience that I've had when you're talking to people about these changes. That age, 65, you will talk to a lot of people who they've lost their private health insurance. Especially older Americans who are unemployed right now and don't have health care, and they're barely hanging on. They're basically counting the days. They're not going to the doctor until they get Medicare, hoping that once they're on Medicare, they can go, and if there's any issues. But there's really, especially 63, 62, 63, 64, everybody I talk to about this idea of raising it notes that it is just, it's a cruel policy. It would hurt people.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, we run a national helpline for people with Medicare, and we very often talk to people they're just gasping. They're waiting to get to the finish line to get to that Medicare coverage so that they can get their health needs met. And it's really important because one of the reasons that people suggest raising the Medicare age is they say, well, people are living longer and they're working longer. But that's actually not true for many individuals. Most people end up retiring at the age 62. If they've worked in a high labor job most of their life, then they're really not able to wait sometimes even until 62 to retire. So this idea that we would raise the age by 2 years would really affect people, most of all, who can't wait to age 67 to retire, who are maybe already struggling to wait until age 65 to retire. And there are a number of people, particularly those who have lower incomes, who may not have access to health care coverage at all during that time, and it's quite scary.
The human costs are just unquestionable. I mean, this is a cruel policy. But what I think adds insult to injury is that it's also a stupid policy. And by that I mean it wouldn't actually save any money, right? I mean, and I know we don't want to get too wonky, but it's actually quite simple to understand why raising the age would take the youngest people out of Medicare and put the oldest people into the broken private health insurance system. So there's been studies that have talked about how it actually wouldn't reduce costs either, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, in actuality, it simply shifts costs to other payers in the healthcare market. So the federal government would save money, but outside of the federal government, costs would be shifted onto beneficiaries themselves, people who have to pay more for their health care when they're 65 and 66. Insurers or employers who would pick up the tab, insuring those who now are 65 and 66 and in the private healthcare market. And also state governments would pick up the cost for those that they're insuring on the Medicaid rolls. So it ends up doubling the cost for older adults, for states, for employers, and only saving the federal government. So it's very wrong-headed policy.
Stupid and cruel. That's how I shorthand raising
Yes.
the eligibility age on Medicare. What are some of the other proposals out there that folks should be aware when they hear people talking about it, that these are cuts?
Mm-hmm. One thing I think that comes across as a very common sense policy is this idea that we can ask the wealthy to pay more in their Medicare premiums. And I think there are a couple things you have to understand with that policy. First, already wealthier people on Medicare are paying higher premiums. If you make an income of $85,000 per year as an individual or as $170,000 per year as a couple, you are paying a higher Medicare premium, and that premium goes up depending on your income. Some lawmakers have proposed that as many as 1 in 4 people with Medicare should be paying higher Medicare premiums.
So let me just push on that. When they're saying, let's ask the wealthy to pay more, when a lot of people say that, like in Social Security, we say, let's make millionaires and billionaires pay the same rate as the rest of America. And that makes sense to people, right? Because you're talking about millionaires and billionaires paying the same rate as the rest of Americans. And that just seems fair. But that's not at all what we're talking about here, right? And they're trying to conflate. I think they believe they can conflate them and make people understand that they're going to ask billionaires to pay more. But we're not talking about billionaires, are we? Who are we talking about?
Well, in this case, we're talking about people in the middle class. So again, already in Medicare, millionaires and billionaires are paying the highest Medicare premiums. With some of these proposals, you might go down to incomes of $47,000 per year, individuals paying a higher Medicare premium than others. And that's really an increase on the middle class. That's not at all talking about wealthier beneficiaries. I think another thing that's important to point out is that we have a different definition of wealthy in Medicare than we do in our tax policies. A cornerstone really of the election debate was, we should be taxing, the wealthier should pay higher taxes. Well, what was the income that we generally talked about when we said wealthy? $250,000 per year. Eventually, the policy was those making $450,000 per year pay more. But in Medicare, you pay more if you make $85,000 per year. And we're actually considering a policy that would affect those making $47,000 per year, and essentially saying that those are wealthier folks who need to be paying more. And I think the last point that's really important there, the reason that we have to go that far down the income spectrum and really think about charging the middle class more or calling the middle class wealthy, is that most people with Medicare don't have high incomes. By and large,
Right.
Older adults are living on very limited incomes. So you really can't eke savings out of the pockets of people with Medicare, or wealthy people with Medicare, because there are just too few of them.
There's a trick that they like to do in D.C. and the elite media like to do it as well, which is to not just be straightforward about what they're proposing, right? And it is on purpose complicated. But let me try to paint, I think, what most of our listeners understand. But at the same time, they're proposing making folks who've earned their benefits pay more. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is through changing definitions, because they don't want to say, we're going to cut the benefits that you've earned. On the Social Security side, there are similar proposals, right? The chained CPI, and they call it it's just a technical tweak. It's really complicated, and they really count on people just tuning out. Mm-hmm. This is a benefit cut. It's a benefit cut that compounds and adds on itself every year so that it hits the oldest of the old hardest. And what we're talking about at its root there is we're decreasing people's income during retirement, right? So people will have less money during retirement. Mm-hmm. On the other side of the coin, on Medicare, and knowing that seniors face a lot of their costs are actually on healthcare, mm-hmm. we're saying, well, let's lower their income and increase their costs. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair. We're looking at, slowly eroding Social Security benefits, the foundation really of retirement security for people, and at the same time increasing their healthcare costs. And the reality is that, people are already squeezed on very limited incomes, most of which comes from Social Security. We receive the most common reason that people call our helpline is that they're having difficulty affording their Medicare costs. and most of them are living on incomes of $16,000, $17,000, $18,000 per year. The bottom line is they just simply cannot afford to pay more for their health care, and their situation will be made even worse off if they have less Social Security to rely on.
It's really stunning on so many levels because, A, we're going to talk with Dean Baker later in the program, and we're going to go into the facts, how things that we should have learned around economics that I believe, have the elite in this country are willfully pretending aren't true. Like that you can't actually get to prosperity through austerity. Mm-hmm. If you keep cutting these programs, you're just pulling money out of the economy.
Right.
Right. So the whole theory is wrong. But then it's even worse because how they're thinking about implementing this wrong-headed and false theory are some of the cruelest ways possible. Right. I mean, they're talking about cuts to those who can least afford them. It's deeply un-American in my eyes. We are not a nation that tries to balance the budget on the backs of seniors, the disabled. We're not, while at the same time really not asking the Wall Street billionaires who, for the most part, I believe you've got to be around 98% responsible for the crash in 2008, which is the reason that people are talking about austerity. Right? So you have these billionaires who've crashed the economy. Then you have these politicians who want to, because of that, they're going to implement policies based on a false theory. Those policies are going to help the billionaires who crash the economy. I mean, that is not going too far. It's stunning that is what is being talked about in a very reasoned debate around town right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up, Wall Street and billionaires in the healthcare context. It's really important to talk about some of the industries that benefit from Medicare and that, quite frankly, are overpaid by the Medicare program. The pharmaceutical industry, the medical device industry, Medicare Advantage, private plans. There are a lot of policy options, very reasonable policy options that would scale back spending to those industries, to those players, that would not involve touching beneficiaries at all or cutting benefits.
So these are options that if you do want to go and talk about health care costs, which is a very real conversation to have because that's the issue. It's health care costs. It's not Medicare. Absolutely. Right? I mean, I call it health care and a stick of gum because they put these charts out, right? And they have a line that's scarily going straight up. And they say Medicare, Medicaid, and health care costs. But the thing is, you could pull out Medicare and the line stays like that. You could pull out Medicaid and the line stays like that because it's the underlying health care cost.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
So I call it the stick of gum because you could say, oh, well, yeah, the price of a stick of gum is bankrupting the nation. Look at this chart. It's health care plus the price of a stick of gum, and it will consume all of our GDP in the future. It's just lying with, obfuscating the facts. And you were getting into why. Why is this? I believe that some of the people you talk about, pharmaceutical industry, mm-hmm. I mean, these are companies that are tens of billions of dollars. They get most of their original research is publicly funded. Most of the cost of developing new drugs is actually taxpayer funded. Mm-hmm. And then they reap enormous benefits. They take a little bit of that profit and they put it into hiring people in this town to saturate Capitol Hill to make sure that whenever we are talking about addressing healthcare costs, we don't look at them. We don't look at billionaires. We look at redefining people making around $40,000 a year as rich so we can ask them to pay more. What are some, because I think everyone who's watching and listening today understands that that's just the wrong way to go. It is an un-American thing to do, to ask those who've served our country. Disabled veterans would get hit incredibly hard under all of these proposals. And while exempting billionaires and millionaires on Wall Street, exempting pharmaceutical companies. So I want to talk about what are some ways that we can actually propose? How can we push back? A big part of this show is enabling folks who want to fight back. They understand that what's going on right now is not fair and not the right direction, and we want to do something about it. So what are some of the proposals on the table that are going the right way, asking the right people to pick up the tab?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important examples is around restoring discounts that the federal government received on pharmaceutical drugs in Medicare. Before the passage of Medicare Part D, people who were dually eligible for Medicare and Medicaid, so low-income people who benefited from the Medicare and Medicaid programs, for their drugs, the federal government received a discount from pharmaceutical manufacturers for those medicines. And when Medicare Part D was passed, that discount went away, and that essentially created a windfall profit for the pharmaceutical industry.
Let me just go back and explain. So, dual eligibles. These are folks who are dually eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid. So, who are we talking about there? Who are the folks who we're talking about?
There are the lowest of the lowest income people who have Medicare. They tend to be more vulnerable. They tend to have chronic health care needs and significant long-term care health needs. They tend to be individuals who are living at or below the federal poverty level. So they're making incomes less than $11,000 per year.
And long-term care, a lot of people are mistaken about what Medicaid does. And long-term care, primarily, we wouldn't have a functioning system if Medicaid didn't pay for long-term care.
That's true.
Because the costs are pretty astronomical. So we're talking oftentimes with dual eligibles, it really is the most vulnerable citizens in this nation, right? We're talking about folks who have chronic health issues, who might be in a long-term care facility. And right now, because of when they passed Part D, Medicare Part D, which is the prescription drug plan, they changed the law so that instead of paying the Medicaid price for drugs, they're paying the Medicare price for drugs, right?
Yes, which is quite a bit higher. So the federal government lost that discount that it received on those drugs, and it created a profit for the pharmaceutical industry. And it's a very reasonable, very minimal policy to simply restore those prices for the federal government. It would save over $140 billion over 10 years. And, frankly, it's about spending taxpayer dollars well. Why are we spending? Why is Medicare getting such a worse off deal on pharmaceutical drugs compared to the Medicaid program or compared to the Veterans Administration, which also benefits from these discounts?
And I know that was a rhetorical question, but I'm going to answer it anyways. It's because they put into law with Part D that Medicare can't negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, right?
That is true.
Because the prescription drug plan, it was passed under the Bush presidency, and there was a lot of really bad ideas in there. One of them being to say, you know what, we don't believe in the market. We don't believe that a large buyer of services should be able to use their buying power to negotiate. We would rather actually set the prices. And I'm being a little bit comical because this is a Republican proposal, right? But they don't believe in this case that the market should set the prices of the drugs. That simple fix alone would be something that we could do besides asking folks who are the most vulnerable in our society to pay more. It's just saying not even going above what they used to pay, right? It's just a return to a sensible policy.
Yep.
What are some of the words that are used to describe this? Because I know, again, even on our side, it gets very complicated. So negotiating prescription drug prices with Medicare. This is actually oftentimes encapsulated in that when people say that, right?
Right, yeah. So this is essentially a form of negotiation. It's simply a discount that's written into law that the federal government would get on prescription drugs for these specific Medicare beneficiaries. So it's simply, I think about it as one of the tools in the toolbox of Medicare that allows Medicare to get the best prices that it can possibly get, because it is, as you said, one of, if not the largest insurer in the country. So what we want to do is really maximize the tools that are available to the federal government that allow it to spend taxpayer dollars well and to get the best possible prices. And right now it's limited from doing that because the law said Medicare cannot engage in these practices.
So if people want to learn more about these issues and take action, can they go to your website and find out more information?
Yeah, absolutely. It's www.medicarerights.org. And also, I would just encourage folks who have questions about their Medicare, whether you're caring for somebody with Medicare or you have Medicare yourself, to call our helpline at 1-800-333-4114.
That's fantastic. Stacy Sanders, Federal Policy Director with the Medicare Rights Center. I'm going to ask her to stick around after the break. We're going to be joined by Dean Baker, who's going to talk about some of the economics, the economic questions around these policies that we've been discussing. I'm going to close with this. Negotiating pharmaceutical prices that Medicare pays is a sensible policy. It's a fair policy, and we need to make sure that people in Washington, D.C. know that that's what the American people demand. That they don't want to reclassify middle-class Americans as rich so that they can pay more for the Medicare they earned. We want sensible policies like negotiating prescription drug prices in Medicare. Stacy, thank you so much. It was such a great segment, and we'll be right back after this.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
This is John Bauman. You know me best as Bowser, formerly of the group Sha Na Na. And you know, when we were rocking and rolling all those years ago, I wasn't particularly worrying about my retirement or how I'd pay for health care. But now that I'm 65, I really understand the importance of Medicare. Not just for myself, but for generations of working Americans who need secure health care as they get older. That's why this election is so important. The Romney-Ryan Coupon Care Plan will mean the end of traditional Medicare. It gives seniors a partial payment which loses value over time and raises our health care costs as much as $500 more each month. Coupon Care also puts us at the mercy of private insurers, making it harder to pick our own doctors. All of this to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy? Are you kidding me? Americans of all ages say no to Coupon Care. Bum 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 dang a dang dang ding a dong ding. Preserve Medicare.
Social Security and Medicare. These programs touch the lives of virtually every American family. Yet with so much misinformation out there, Americans are pretty confused about their future. You deserve the truth. For more than 30 years, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare has been leading the fight to preserve our nation's most successful programs. Join us and find out how to keep Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid strong for all generations. Learn more online at thetruthnow.org.
This is John Bauman. You know me best as Bowser, formerly of the group Sha Na Na. And you know, when we were rocking and rolling all those years ago, I wasn't particularly worrying about my retirement or how I'd pay for health care. But now that I'm 65, I really understand the importance of Medicare. Not just for myself, but for generations of working Americans who need secure health care as they get older. That's why this election is so important. The Romney-Ryan Coupon Care Plan will mean the end of traditional Medicare. It gives seniors a partial payment which loses value over time and raises our health care costs as much as $500 more each month. Coupon Care also puts us at the mercy of private insurers, making it harder to pick our own doctors. All of this to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy? Are you kidding me? Americans of all ages say no to Coupon Care. Bum 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 dang a dang dang ding a dong ding. Preserve Medicare.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
And we are back. It is Sunday, May 12th. It is a fantastic day in Washington, D.C. You're listening to Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. I am sitting in for Maya today. I'm Alex Lawson, the co-owner of We Act Radio. We're joined by Stacy Sanders, who I convinced to stay around to keep the conversation about Medicare going with preeminent economist Dean Baker, who's joining us on phone. Dean, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. How you doing, Alex?
Great. Thanks for calling in on this. I don't know if you listened to the first half of the show, but Stacy was just explaining about how silly some of these proposals around Medicare and healthcare costs are. And I asked her to stay with us and really just, because I know that this is something that you talk about a lot. So I wanted to just actually turn the mic over to Stacy a bit. And if you two could just talk about healthcare costs and Medicare, I think that would be really great content. So, Stacy, take it away.
Yeah, sure. Dean, one of the things that Alex brought up was this concept that Medicare is not the problem. In fact, healthcare costs are the problem, and what we really need to be focusing on sort of for the future in terms of thinking about economic growth. And I know, recent trends have suggested that over the last few years, Medicare costs have slowed considerably, and considerably more than private health insurance. So I was wondering if you could speak to that trend and sort of what that means for some of the Medicare proposals that are being considered.
Sure. I don't want to duplicate things you said. I caught the last couple of minutes, but just a couple points that I think always should be front and center in everyone's mind. Medicare is far and away the most efficient part of the country's healthcare system. So the reason why we're looking at problems with Medicare costs down the road, if we are, and I'll come back to that in a second, is because our healthcare costs are way out of line. We pay more than twice as much per person as the average of other wealthy countries, Germany, Canada, whoever you want to throw into the mix. So it's not as though we somehow have Medicare out of control, but otherwise, our system's great. The point is our healthcare costs have been out of control. So, it's really kind of a backwards story to say, oh, we're going to take care of things, we're going to fix Medicare. Okay, fine, but then how do people pay for healthcare? That's the story. It's really just, I think, frankly, dishonest to talk about that way. But the other point, we have these projections that show Medicare costs, Medicaid costs as well, going through the roof, later this decade, next decade, and giving us these enormous budget deficits that we have so many people running around Washington like chickens with their heads cut off because they talk about these deficits 10, 20, 30 years out. They're all driven by projections of rapidly rising healthcare costs. And what we've actually seen over the last 5 years has been a sharp slowdown in healthcare costs. And in fact, healthcare costs haven't even kept pace with the growth of GDP over this period, which is really quite startling. Now, part of that story undoubtedly is the recession. A lot of people, they've lost their jobs, they're cutting back, they put off care, often needed care. That's not a good story. On the other hand, this is clearly going on long enough that it can't just be the recession. The economy's not worse in 2013 than it was in 2010. So the fact that it's going on so long has led many people, many who are much more expert in this than me, to say that this clearly is a change in trends, that we're on a path of much, much slower cost growth. And again, none of us know the future, but what I would say, it's certainly kind of silly to be making drastic changes to the Medicare program under the assumption that we're going to see this rapid cost growth, 5, 10, 15 years out, when in fact all the evidence is we're seeing the opposite. And obviously, if the world changes, we're not idiots, or at least we don't think we're going to be 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. You would presumably make adjustments as you go along. But the idea that we have to do something now because there could be a trend, which at the moment at least the evidence doesn't exist, that's close to crazy.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that often gets said, or sort of there are some who suggest that Medicare is going to crowd out all other parts of our budget, that if we don't get our Medicare spending under control with the aging of the baby boomers, that we won't be able to invest in other things like education and roads and bridges and jobs. Is that true? Is there any truth to this claim?
Well, again, all of that, when people make those claims, it's all premised on an idea that our healthcare costs, again, it's always driven by healthcare costs, and these are overwhelmingly private sector healthcare costs. Medicare isn't providing healthcare, it's paying for healthcare. So the healthcare costs are in the private sector. So we could draw scenarios where private healthcare sector costs go through the roof, and if that really were true, then Medicare will be very expensive. Now, could we afford it? Well, sure. You know, we still have a very low tax rate compared to other countries in the world. We could look to make other cutbacks, and of course, we could look to savings in the program itself. But the point is, they're all driven by private sector healthcare costs. If we have a story where private healthcare costs look like any other wealthy country, Medicare would be a non-issue. So either we have a story where our healthcare costs are more or less contained, which again, the recent evidence is that may well be true, in which case Medicare is not going to be a big problem going forward. Alternatively, you can construct stories, and when I'm saying that, I don't mean to demean the people who are saying this. I mean, it's possible. You can construct stories where healthcare costs really do explode, but if that's the case, we have to fix our healthcare system. It's sort of like, you know, if the whole city were on fire and we say, oh my God, we have this house over on 4th Street, we've got to put out the fire on 4th Street. Well, you probably do, but you better take care of the whole city. So if you have a story where Medicare costs are going to bankrupt the country, that's because healthcare costs are going to bankrupt the country. If people don't know what I mean, one of the big reasons Chrysler and General Motors faced bankruptcy back in 2009 was because they pay for their workers' health care, and it's enormously expensive. We would see that times 1,000 if you saw this explosive path of healthcare cost growth. So focusing on Medicare is really, I would just say, dishonest. Everyone knows it's not the problem.
We took some time, Dean, earlier to talk about the fact that much of the argument that's going on these days in D.C. is dishonest. They don't actually want to talk about how they're cutting benefits. They don't. So they create, you know, a language to stay away from having to say our proposals are about cutting the earned benefits that people are relying on. And what you're just talking about now is even more so. It's saying, look, you're not even focused on the right thing. All the policies that you're talking about, they're not just cruel, they're also stupid because they wouldn't address the issue, which is healthcare costs. And there's some, you know, discussion right now that healthcare costs are slowing. But if healthcare costs are the problem, then let's talk about policies and solutions aimed at the problem themselves. So we talked a bit about Medicare negotiating for prescription drugs with dual eligibles using the Medicaid rebate. But really what that's talking about is trying to push down some of the costs, the prices that pharma charges for prescription drugs. What are some other policies aimed in that area, the prescription drug area, where there is a lot of cost growth?
Well, you can go much, much further than that. I mean, Medicaid pays less than Medicare. The Veterans Administration pays less than Medicaid. They have a formulary, and they tell companies that, you know, you want to sell to the Veterans Administration, here's what you're going to charge. Other countries have, you know, more serious price control systems. Canada, other wealthy countries. It's important to keep in mind, people talk about this as being an interference with the free market. It's not. The reason drug prices are high is because we interfere with the free market. We give companies patent protection. We're the only country in the world that tells Merck and Pfizer, we're going to give you a monopoly. We'll arrest anyone that competes with you. We're going to give you a monopoly. Go ahead, charge whatever you feel like. Here's a cancer drug. It will save people's lives. You know, if you can get someone to pay $1 million for it, good for you. We're the only country in the world that does that. Every other country, they give monopolies, but they say, okay, we're going to restrict them. We're not just going to give you a monopoly and let you charge whatever you feel like. We could do the same thing every other country in the world does. Obviously, the drug companies will yell and scream and probably kill people to prevent us from doing that. But, you know, that's not interference with the free market. That's what everyone else does. Result of that is, if you look at drug costs in other countries, generally they're around half as much as they are in the United States, and they're getting the same drugs we do. So it's not that they're getting bad care. They're getting the exact same drugs we do. We could look for reducing cost elsewhere. You know, our doctors get paid about twice as much as doctors in other wealthy countries. I'm sort of struck when we have the immigration debate. We're saying we have to bring in more STEM workers. No one talks about doctors. Well, that's because doctors are really powerful, and the American Medical Association doesn't want more doctors to come in and drive down their wages. So they don't even let members of Congress talk about it. But that would really save us an awful lot of money. You could look to our healthcare system. The reason why we pay more isn't that we're getting more. It's not that we're getting better care, more care. We don't see our doctors more. We don't have more scans or whatever. It's simply we pay 2 or 3 times as much, sometimes 10 times as much for everything. And getting our costs more in line with everyone else in the world is how we would make Medicare and our healthcare system more generally affordable.
So I'm going to try to tie a few things together. It's a complex system, but when you have experts like Stacy and you, Dean, I really do think we can explain how very simple solutions that are really popular would dramatically impact this. But at the same time, things like asking pharmaceutical companies to lower their prices, which would be actually pure. That's the market. Is the power of the market would drive the prices to be closer to the cost. But right now, they're monopolists. So they say you charge whatever people will pay, and that's exactly what the price will be. But we're not actually going the right direction on that. If you look at some of the ways that you can see this is not how we deal with it in the United States, but it's how we deal with it around the world. With trade policies that really expand American pharmaceutical companies' ability to actually charge whatever they want in other countries, more in line with what they do in America than other countries who have seen that this makes no sense to allow these companies that make billions of dollars in profit to charge whatever they want so that only the few can afford drugs. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, and then are there some policies that push back on that?
Yeah, the latter point you were making about how we're exporting this model elsewhere in the world, it's important for people to understand this is a really central part of our trade agenda. We call it free trade, and it's really kind of funny because it's 180 degrees at odds with that. Free trade means, you have no interferences with the market. What the United States negotiators are doing in what we're calling free trade agreements, and it's been in every agreement from NAFTA, CAFTA, everything that we've been hearing about in the papers over the last 2 decades, central in that are rules that require Mexico, Central America, other countries to provide much greater protection, patent protection for the U.S. pharmaceutical industry so that they could charge much more for their drugs in those countries. And it's important to understand, drugs are really cheap. That might sound strange to people because they all know that, they have to pay $300 a prescription or $1,000. I mean, maybe their insurance pays it, but in any case, there's a big number there. Their copay might be $25, $50. Drugs, though, you can get generic drugs, a chain drugstore, $5 to $10 a prescription. The drugs you're getting as generics are not different as a group. They're not chemically different for the drugs you're paying $300, $500, $1,000 for. The difference is that the government's given a patent monopoly to the drugs that are selling for $500, $700 a prescription. And, I understand that's a way to finance research and development, probably a really bad way. It also leads to corruption. This is textbook economics. If you let a drug company sell a drug for $700 that they could profitably sell for $5, well, you give them a huge incentive to lie about the effectiveness and safety of that drug, and they do it all the time. That's exactly what Econ 101 predicts, and they do it all the time. It's bad medicine. So in terms of what we're doing around the world, we're trying to push this model, which is incredibly pernicious. It's horrible in the U.S. It'll be horrible, perhaps worse elsewhere in the world, because most people could at least afford that, or their insurers could afford it. When you go to a country, Mexico or other developing countries, a lot of people can't afford it. So you're making drugs unaffordable for a lot of people, and it's going to produce bad medicine. So, what could people do about that? Again, pushing for, negotiated drug prices, other ways to lower drug prices in the U.S., that would be a big deal, but certainly opposing these trade deals. We have the Trans-Pacific Partnership that's, on President Obama's trade agenda front and center. That's going to include stronger rules, stronger patent protection that will be applied to the parties to that treaty. And same thing when they talk about a U.S. European Union trade agreement. That almost certainly is going to have stronger rules on protection for the drug industry. So these deals will be sold as free trade deals, and there might be a few items in there that actually look like free trade, but the bulk of the items in there have nothing at all to do with free trade. And in the case of the drug provisions, 180 degrees at odds is free trade. We're calling white, black, hot, cold. This is just, that's what you do in Washington, but, I don't think most people in the country appreciate that sort of nonsense.
In the global public health world, there's, if you are ever at a demonstration or a protest with folks who work in the global public health world who have seen this effect, and that, this isn't a theoretical thing. When you're talking about life-saving drugs, when you're talking about antiretroviral therapy for HIV, you're talking about millions of people without access to life-saving drugs. And they have tried to distill down one of the things you talked about the price, because people assume that that's what it costs, but it's not at all that. And their phrase is pills cost pennies, greed costs lives. And I really do think that's what we're talking about here, because as you pointed out, the cost of the pharmaceuticals themselves are extremely low. And everything you're paying on top of that is just drug company greed.
That's exactly right. And, their comeback is always, well, we have to finance the research. Well, the research has already been paid for, so at the point where you have the drug developed, you already did the research. So that's history. It's sunk costs. This is economics, by the way. It's basically, I'm not being a radical economist here. I'm being, this is Econ 101. I've taught it many, many years. This is what I teach a student. That's what everyone teaches their students. It's a sunk cost. It's history. So the drugs are a few pennies. Now, how do you pay for the research going forward? Well, we can continue with this system, but I would argue it's a really bad system, because you get a huge amount of waste. You get companies that lie all the time about the safety, effectiveness of their drugs. You get a lot of duplicative research because, Company A is not going to share its findings with Company B, because why would they? They're not going to tell Company B, hey, you're wasting time. We just did that. It doesn't work. They aren't going to do that. They disclose only what they absolutely have to disclose. You would be so much better off if you had the research funded publicly, had it in the public domain. When you got research findings, they're fully public, they're posted on the internet, other people could benefit from that. We would almost certainly see much, much more progress in the development of pharmaceuticals, and we would not have the drug companies trying to mislead us about the safety and effectiveness of their drugs.
I'm going to, again, point out that this is a very complex issue, but there's also some real simplicity here if we can kind of cut through it. What we're saying is that the cost to produce these drugs are very low, and people could pay much closer to the costs if it wasn't for these patents that the U.S. government grants companies, which are, at their root, they're militarily protected monopolies around the world that allow a company to produce something, and no one else can do that. And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it does. I think it always, people assume that this is like a modern thing, that this was, the system must have been thought out, and, we've tried all sorts of other things, and we probably have computer simulations that show that the patent system, but that's not at all what happened, right? I mean, the patent, what is it? It's a 16th century idea, or? Yeah,
this dates from feudal guilds. This was back, when you had master craftsmen, artisans of different types, candlestick makers, blacksmiths. And it was a way they'd have their journeymen come, and they would say, okay, you can't use my tricks, at least not for a period of time. So I'm going to teach you to be, a good blacksmith, a good goldsmith, whatever it might be. You can't use my tricks for 2 decades or whatever the time period would be. That's the origins of this. So it's not as though we had some, geniuses sit down and go, what's the best way to finance prescription drug development? Quite the opposite. And in fact, I remember when I first began to look into this about 2 decades ago, I thought I'd just, there'd be some key articles that would show, here's how we know the patent system's the best way. There aren't. You won't find that. And for the most part, economists do their best to avoid even asking the question. I mean, there are a few, very few, that actually ask, is this the best way to do it? And, I'm not going to say research is conclusive because there hasn't been a lot done. But, I just say on the face of it, I think you're pretty hard-pressed to make the case this is the best way to do it. And just to give you some basic numbers here, the U.S. spends close to $300 billion a year on prescription drugs. If we snapped our fingers and got rid of all the patent protection, just let everything be sold in the free market, we'd probably be spending about a tenth of that, about $30 billion. So that gap is $270 billion. The industry claims it does about $50 billion in research each year. So the amount of extra money that we're paying, $270 billion, is more than 5 times the amount of money that the industry claims it's spending on research. And when I say claim, my reason for saying that is they do a lot of research that, a lot of what they call research is actually more like marketing. And I'll just give you one example. There's something called a seeding study, where after a drug's already been approved by the FDA, they distribute a company, say a Merck or a Pfizer, one of the big drug companies, will distribute large numbers of samples to doctors, and they say, oh, we want you to see how this works for X, Y, and Z. and they're supposed to report back. Well, the point is they want people to try the drug, and it's rare, just kind of common sense. If your doctor is giving a drug to treat hypertension or cholesterol, whatever it might be, and it's working, they're not going to switch. So if they gave you samples, some amount of free samples, and they got you using this drug and it's working, well, they'll keep you on the drug after you no longer have the free samples. So the industry calls this research when, for all practical purposes, it's marketing.
And a lot of those profits just go to straightforwardly to the marketing. It's right. I mean, they're putting ads on TV, and that's their main model is to actually direct market to consumers, marketing to providers, doctors, and others. And I'm going to turn it back over to Stacy, but I would love to talk about this for so long because it's such a interesting. It seems complex, but the answers are so simple and they're right there. But I want to leave this discussion and turn it back over to Stacy to talk about Medicare with this one point that not only is this the opposite of a free market or a fair market, right? This is distorting the market for the advantage of the very rich. It also impacts our ability to our entrepreneurial spirit. The drugs that people are looking for because of this system are the drugs that they can charge the most for. So they're drugs that are very useful to the wealthiest in society, not the drugs that are most beneficial to society, to the world. We're not looking to invent drugs that are most beneficial, although there's great research going on at all times to do that. The way the market is set up is that it will produce drugs that they can market to wealthy people. Hence, you have, I think, 5 or 6 drugs aimed just at erectile dysfunction, right? And you're talking about no investment in drugs for tuberculosis or malaria, which kill millions of people around the globe. So obviously the system doesn't work in the way that it should. It doesn't work in the way that medicine should, where they're looking to do the greatest good to the greatest amount of people. And after I climb down from my stump there after that speech, I'll turn it over to Stacy to talk a little bit about Medicare with you, Dean.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things just sort of struck me as you were speaking, Dean, was, talking about the issue of affordability and kind of bringing it back to the perspective of the beneficiary, of the older adult or the person with a disability who's relying on the Medicare benefit. We find often that folks who call our helpline, they're calling because they can't afford their medicines or they can't afford a healthcare service, even with Medicare coverage. And I think that's just an incredibly thing to underscore because I think it gets lost in some of the conversations, the broader conversations that we have about our healthcare system and about Medicare. And I think it gets lost often because the older adults are characterized as sort of greedy geezers, as folks who are doing just fine. They're getting by with enough income. They have a very generous Medicare benefit, and I think that sort of twisted narrative is really leading to a lot of some of the proposals that would cut benefits or shift costs to beneficiaries. So I was just wondering if you could comment on that, because I think more and more often we see older adults characterized as greedy and as getting by just fine with a generous benefit, when in fact what we hear is that people are really struggling and they're stretching very limited incomes and they often can't afford their medicines or they can't afford the services their doctors order for them.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, being in Washington, watching the different policy debates, and, I end up covering a lot of different areas because we're a small shop and there's a lot of things to do, but, one of the advantages of that is you get to see kind of the opposite arguments being made, by the almost exact same people. So when we're talking about raising taxes on the wealthy, there were articles. I remember Washington Post actually had a big news article where they talked to this couple that I think their combined income was $500,000, and their question was, are they really rich? We're going to raise taxes on these people. Are these people really rich? And said, yeah, some expenses, this and then. Yeah, they aren't all that comfortable. They have to worry. Well, somehow we turn around and we talk to people over 65, people getting Medicare and Social Security, and we have this idea they're comfortable. The median income for a person over age 65 is $20,000 a year, and that's not poverty. Most of them are living on Social Security for about 2/3 of their income. Social Security is about $15,000 a year, thereabout. That's not poverty. But the idea somehow someone is living comfortably on $20,000 a year. I think it's a great tribute to Social Security that, yes, that does keep them out of poverty. Yes, Medicare does deal with most of their health care needs. But the idea that this is really comfortable, I mean, it's just like, you want to grab these people and all the people are saying that, they would be appalled at the idea that someone close to them, their children, were living on $20,000 a year. And, again, seniors, even with Medicare, have way more health care expenses than most of the rest of the population. In other words, what they have left to pay out of pocket is much more than what, say, people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s typically pay. So, this is just really kind of a non sequitur, and, you're just sort of, when people are saying this stuff, it just kind of flies in the face of reality. Now, one of the things they sometimes say is they go, oh, look at this, we have all these poor kids that don't get a Head Start. And you go, yeah, that's horrible. What on earth does that have to do with seniors struggling to get by on $20,000 a year? We have a lot of people who are incredibly wealthy in this country, oftentimes based on government largesse, say too big to fail banks that in fact have an implicit government subsidy. We could talk about that, but going around saying this person, getting a senior getting $20,000 a year, we have to take something from them because they're better off than the kid who should be in Head Start and isn't getting Head Start. That's an obscene discussion, and people saying that are just being dishonest. There's lots of places to get that money, and it is certainly horrible that we aren't providing decent pre-care, decent care for young children. But the idea somehow that seniors are to blame is really just dishonest.
I agree. And one other way that this gets a bit twisted is there's a pretty popular talking point among some both Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, this idea that people get 3 times in Medicare benefits what they pay in. So you get 3 times as much as you actually pay in taxes to Medicare. And my understanding is that analysis is quite skewed, and I was wondering if you could explain that.
Well, there's a lot of things, so they don't count, for example, income taxes that people pay. They don't, it's just narrowly focused. What you paid in on Medicare taxes, what you get back. It's very, very narrowly focused. But the other point about that is if people paid what we were paying in other wealthy countries, they wouldn't be getting 3 times. It'd be very, very close. I mean, whether it ends up being a positive or negative at the end of the day, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. You'd have to pick which country, look at very, very closely. But the argument here is because we're paying our doctors twice as much as we pay doctors in Canada and the UK, somehow seniors are getting a free ride. And I don't quite understand the logic of that. It's sort of like if, we had a government housing program and we went around and paid all the landlords twice as much as the market rent, and then we told everyone in the housing program, boy, you're getting a great deal, look at this. It's really kind of, again, a non sequitur. Yes, we pay a lot for our health care in this country, and that is a big problem. And it's not because people are getting great care, because, again, we know they're not. People don't, by any measure, come out better on average than people do in other wealthy countries. We simply pay too much for it. So somehow that benefits seniors because we're paying basically doctors, the drug companies, the medical supply industry, the insurers are ripping off the government. Somehow that we then turn to the seniors and saying, oh, you're getting a free ride. That doesn't make any sense.
Dean Baker, the co-director of Center for Economic Policy and Research. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for explaining some of these issues. Stacy, I'm going to give you the final word. In all of the discussion that we had, there's a lot of they're trying to confuse people by making it more complicated. But bottom line for us, what are people talking about in Medicare? Just reiterate what it is that they're actually talking about doing right now to the Medicare program.
Sure. The unfortunate reality is that the conversation about changes to Medicare is dominated entirely, I think, by this focus on proposals that would shift costs onto people with Medicare, that would expect them to pay more for their health care costs. And that just, again, I think Dean said it really well. It sort of flies in the face of the reality of what people with Medicare are already living on, the meager income that most people live on who have Medicare, who are older and retired, and also the high amount that they already contribute to their health care costs. And it's really, really important to shift that dialogue and to instead focus on how we can control healthcare spending, ways that we can look at addressing healthcare prices instead of digging into the pockets of people who don't have more to provide.
Stacey Sanders, the Federal Policy Director for the Medicare Rights Center. Thank you for joining. You're listening to Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. And we'll see you next week at the same time. Thanks a lot, Dean and Stacey.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com. You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Thanks to the lobbying clout of global corporations, governments worldwide tend to take a dangerously bass-backwards approach to environmental regulation. They accept a corporate product as safe until it's proven otherwise, usually after a great many funerals. A better approach is called the precautionary principle, requiring proof that a product is safe before a corporation pushes it on the public. The European Union recently considered putting this sensible principle into action. But, in the face of furious corporate lobbying, the EU ran bass-backwards. At issue was a proposed 2-year ban on some pesticides called neonicotinoids, widely suspected of causing mass die-offs of honeybee colonies. That's a big problem, for bees and for us humans too. Of the 100 crops that provide 90% of the world's food, 71 are pollinated by honeybees. No bees, no food. So, propose EU scientists, let's remove some of these chemicals for a couple of years to try saving the bees and our food supply. No, you don't, shrieked Bayer and Syngenta, 2 giant chemical conglomerates that make neonicotinoids. Their lobbyists swarm the EU, wailing that there is, quote, no scientific certainty that their poisons are causing this looming catastrophe. Of course, the whole idea of the modest moratorium was to test the probability